My name is Angela. I'm 32 years old, and I thought the scariest thing in my life would be balancing corporate spreadsheets and tax audits. Numbers never frightened me. They behaved when you treated them properly, predictable, obedient, even comforting. What I never imagined was that my own parents would turn numbers into weapons against me. The day I opened my mailbox and saw a thick official envelope stamped with the county court seal, my knees nearly buckled. It wasn't junk mail. It wasn't even a bill. It was a lawsuit filed by my mother and father against me, their daughter. The charge that I owed them nearly half the value of the house I had just bought, my dream home, the one I had saved 12 relentless years for. I sat on the cold steps of my porch, hands trembling as I read the legal jargon over and over. The words blurred, but the meaning remained sharp. My parents, Thomas and Sandra Johnson, believed I was their investment, and it was time to cash out. But this story doesn't begin with court summonses. It begins decades earlier in a small rental house with beige walls where my father ruled not with fists, but with ledger books. Growing up in the Johnson household meant every penny had a destination before it even hit the palm of your hand. My father, Thomas, was the self-proclaimed financial mastermind of our family. He worked as an insurance claims adjuster, though he carried himself like he was the chairman of the Federal Reserve. My mother, Sandra, a medical office administrator, stood faithfully by his side, nodding to every decree, her silence louder than any protest might have been. The infamous ledgers were my father's pride, thick leather-bound books that he updated nightly at the kitchen table under the yellow glow of a desk lamp. He recorded everything: rent checks, grocery receipts, utility bills, even the cost of my school lunch down to the dime. He tallied them with military precision, sometimes licking his finger before flipping to the next page as though he were handling sacred scripture. I was 7 when I realized that in our house, money didn't just pay for things, it decided who we were allowed to be. For my birthday that year, my grandmother pressed a crisp $20 bill into my hand. It was the most money I'd ever held, and my mind raced with possibilities: the stuffed unicorn at the mall, a paperback series all my friends were reading, maybe even ice cream for me and my cousin. But before I could even tuck it into my little rainbow purse, my father's shadow loomed over me. "Angela," he said firmly, holding out his hand, "you need to learn about money management early." I froze, the 20 clutched in my fist. He pried it from my hand with a practiced calm. 15 goes into your college fund. You can keep 5. But, and here he raised a warning finger, you'll show me exactly how you spend it. $5. $5 with strings attached. Even at 7, I understood it wasn't really mine. That day, as he scribbled in his ledger, noting my contribution, something inside me shrank. I had no control, no autonomy. This was just the beginning. Year after year, holiday after holiday, any money given to me, birthday cards with bills tucked inside congratulatory cash. For good report cards vanished into my father's system. They called it teaching me responsibility. But I learned something else entirely, that my desires came second, that my freedom was negotiable, and that numbers could be chains. Our home life mirrored this philosophy. Despite both my parents having stable jobs, we never owned a house. We bounced from rental to rental, sometimes moving within a year, always under the guise that smart people rent. My father preached it like gospel at the dinner table. Owning a house is a financial trap. Only fools lock themselves into mortgages. Wealthy people rent and invest the difference. For a while, I believed him. But even as a teenager, I noticed a different reality. The neighbors who owned their homes had stability. They painted walls, planted gardens, replaced fences. We, on the other hand, lived in beige boxes with nails we weren't allowed to hammer and floors we weren't allowed to scratch. One evening when I was 14, I dared to mention this observation aloud. My father's face darkened. What followed was a 30-minute lecture about visible wealth versus actual wealth, about how homeowners were secretly enslaved to banks, about how we were the wise ones. My mother sipped her tea quietly, her eyes cast down as though she'd heard the sermon too many times to argue. By 16, I craved independence like oxygen. I got a job bagging groceries on weekends, thrilled at the idea of earning my own money. But when my first paycheck came folded neatly in its envelope, my father summoned me to the kitchen table. He slid a fresh ledger toward me. "Now that you're living under our roof, you contribute." He spoke the word like a judge handing down a sentence. 70% goes to the family fund. 20% to your college fund, which I manage. 10% you can keep for spending. I stared at him, my fingers tightening around the check. But it's my money. I worked for it. His eyes narrowed. And you eat our food, use our electricity, and sleep under our roof. Do you think those things are free? I swallowed the lump in my throat, fighting tears as I handed it over. That night, as the ledger swallowed my hard-earned dollars, something hardened in me. Years later, I would come to recognize this for what it was, financial abuse disguised as discipline. But at the time, it just felt like betrayal. The cruelest cut came the summer before senior year. I needed money for a college application workshop, a chance to strengthen my future. I asked to withdraw from my so-called college fund. My father leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. That money isn't liquid right now. It's invested. Taking it out would incur penalties. Invested where I asked. He smiled vaguely. In CDs, or mutual funds, or maybe a private opportunity. Don't worry about the details. It was then I realized the truth. The money wasn't there. It had never been there. My parents had siphoned it away, wrapped in the illusion of investing in my future. Meanwhile, my father leased new cars every 3 years. My mother's closet quietly swelled with designer handbags she rarely carried. And whenever I asked for money for school trips or sports equipment, they sighed and lectured about financial hardship. The hypocrisy was staggering, and with each small betrayal, the seed of mistrust grew deeper roots. By the time I stood in line to collect my high school diploma, I no longer dreamed of parental support. I dreamed of escape. I dreamed of a life where money wasn't a weapon used against me. I didn't know then that my parents' obsession with control wouldn't end when I turned 18. It would follow me through college into adulthood, and finally into the one place I thought they could never touch, the home I bought with my own 2 hands. And that was the house they would try to take from me. By the time I turned 16, I thought I'd finally found a loophole in my father's system employment. If I could make my own money, I could shape my own future. That belief carried me through the long summer afternoons of pushing shopping carts across the cracked asphalt of the local grocery store parking lot. My uniform shirt sticking to my back, my sneakers worn thin from the constant grind. I didn't care. Every beep of the register, every bag I packed, every coin I earned represented possibility. The first paycheck felt like freedom folded into an envelope. I ripped it open in the break room, staring at the numbers as if they might sprout wings and lift me away from my father's ledgers. That night, I walked into the kitchen with a smile I couldn't contain. But my father was already seated at the table ledger, open pen in hand. His expression was calm, too calm. "Sit down, Angela," he said, tapping the chair opposite him. I sat, the envelope still clutched in my hand. "Since you're living under our roof, eating our food, and using our utilities, you'll contribute to the family fund," he announced matter-of-factly. 70% goes there. 20% into your college fund, your mother and I will manage it. 10% you keep. The words stung like a slap. 70%. That's almost all of it. He raised an eyebrow. "Do you think adulthood is free? Consider it rent. You're learning real responsibility earlier than most." I felt the knot tighten in my stomach as I slid the check across the table. His hand covered it with the finality of a judge stamping a sentence. He immediately noted the figures in his ledger ink, scratching like chains being forged. My mother, standing at the stove, said nothing. Her silence confirmed what I already knew: resistance was useless. That night, lying awake in my narrow bed, I stared at the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead. Each turn whispered a truth I didn't want to accept. I wasn't free. My job didn't buy me independence. It bought me deeper into their control. And yet I kept working. Weekends, evenings, after school, summer breaks. I filled every spare hour with shifts. The 10% I was allowed to keep became my lifeline: a movie ticket, with friends, a secondhand jacket, sometimes just a milkshake that I drank slowly to stretch the feeling of owning something without permission. But the real heartbreak came a year later, when I dared to ask for something bigger. It was the summer before my senior year, and I needed to attend a college application workshop. The fee wasn't outrageous, but it was more than I had in my tiny stash. So I went to my father. "You've been saving for me, right?" I asked carefully. "All those contributions to my college fund, I'd like to use some of it for this workshop." He leaned back, steepling his fingers, his face the picture of rational authority. "That money isn't liquid right now. It's been invested. Pulling it out would incur penalties." My heart sank. Invested where? In CDs, sometimes mutual funds, other times private opportunities through work. Don't worry about the details. The vagueness set off alarms in my mind, but I need it now. It's for my future." He sighed dramatically as if I were unreasonable. "Angela, you have to understand delayed gratification. Real investments take time to grow. You can't expect immediate access." I walked away, a hollow pit growing inside me. The truth had begun to crystallize. The money was gone. My so-called college fund wasn't a nest egg, it was a lie. Over the next few months, I pieced together fragments of truth. The shiny new sedan in the driveway, the unplanned weekend getaways, my mother's collection of handbags that rotated on a shelf like museum pieces. These were where my earnings had gone. My contributions had fueled their indulgences, not my future. I never confronted them directly. I knew the response would be more lectures about responsibility and sacrifice. Instead, I swallowed the bitter knowledge and silently promised myself something: I would never let them control me like this again. Still, I couldn't escape the constant contradictions. My father lectured at dinner about frugality while sipping imported wine. He spoke of the dangers of debt while renewing his car lease every 3 years. My mother claimed we couldn't afford field trips, yet flaunted purses that cost more than the trips themselves. It was hypocrisy, wrapped in the guise of wisdom, and it made me doubt everything. If I couldn't trust them to save for me, what else had they lied about? By the time senior year rolled around, I was exhausted, not just from work and school, but from the emotional gymnastics of living under their roof. Every paycheck felt like a test I couldn't pass, every conversation a trap that twisted my words into ingratitude. One night, after a particularly long shift, I overheard my parents arguing. My father's voice was sharp, defensive. She should be grateful we're teaching her these lessons early. Most kids her age waste their money. My mother's reply was softer but cut deeper. What if she resents us for it? Her words lodged in my chest. Resentment had already taken root. It was growing silently like a weed cracking through concrete. The breaking point came months later. I needed money for application fees, and when I asked again about my college fund, my father snapped. "That money was compensation for all we've done for you. Don't be so selfish." Compensation for raising me. The phrase burned into my memory, echoing in the years that followed. It was the first time my father said out loud what I had always suspected: they didn't see parenting as love. They saw it as an investment. And one day they would expect returns. That day came sooner than I ever imagined. But at 16, all I could do was grit my teeth, push harder at work, and cling to the small fragments of freedom I could buy with my 10%. I didn't know then that this system of control wasn't temporary. It wasn't a lesson. It was a pattern that would follow me to college adulthood and ultimately to the front steps of my dream home. The chains of their money lessons were tightening, and though I would eventually break free, the scars of those links would never fully fade. When college acceptance letters arrived, most of my classmates were celebrating with their parents, family dinners, congratulatory balloons, photos on the porch. I opened mine alone at the kitchen counter, my parents standing stiffly nearby. "Accounting," my father repeated when he read the letter. His lip curled. "Accountants are glorified bookkeepers. You'll waste your potential." "It's what I want," I said quietly, bracing myself. He shook his head, already dismissing me. "If you had any sense, you'd go to law school. Lawyers always have job security. The return on investment is unmatched." There it was again, that word, investment. I wasn't a daughter. I was a portfolio. When I refused to change my major, their response was swift. "Then don't expect us to support you financially," my mother said flatly, her arms crossed. "Choices have consequences." I wasn't surprised, but hearing the words out loud hit like a punch to the ribs. My so-called college fund had already evaporated into thin air. Now whatever I built from this point forward would be entirely mine, or it wouldn't exist at all. That first semester, the financial aid office became my second home. I spent hours filling out forms, chasing scholarships, begging for work-study hours. My days blurred into a rigid schedule: classes in the morning, bookstore shifts in the afternoon, call center in the evenings, graveyard diner, shifts on weekends. My GPA was strong, but sleep became a luxury. Housing was just as brutal. The cheapest option was a triple room in the oldest dorm on campus, the walls yellowed with age, the windows drafty. My roommates were Katie, a nursing student from Colorado, and Jasmine, who dropped out after 6 weeks. Katie and I bonded over our shared survival strategies: instant ramen bulk packs, secondhand textbooks, the constant juggling of work and study. My parents saved for my brother's education, not mine. Katie confessed one night, as we hunched over our desks at 2 a.m., highlighting textbooks with jittery hands. They said nursing was a waste of time for a girl who'd just get married anyway. Her bitterness mirrored mine, and in that moment she became more than a roommate, she became family. Together we learned to stretch $10 into 3 meals, to laugh in the face of exhaustion, to remind each other that we weren't alone in this. Still, there were nights when the weight of it all crushed me. I remember sitting on the dorm floor surrounded by stacks of overdue assignments, my hands trembling from too much coffee, whispering to myself, "You can't let them win." The thought of giving up, of proving my father right, terrified me more than the exhaustion. Then in my second year, everything shifted. It was after an intermediate accounting class when Professor Anthony Wilson asked me to stay behind. He was a tall man with kind eyes behind his glasses, the type who remembered students' names long after they'd left his class. "You have a natural talent," he said, sliding my graded exam across the desk. "A perfect score, but you're burning yourself out. How many jobs are you working?" I hesitated. 3, sometimes 4 if the diner calls me in. His brow furrowed. "That's not sustainable. Have you considered applying for the department's merit scholarship?" I blinked. "There's a scholarship." "There is," he said with a small smile, "and I'll personally recommend you." It felt like a lifeline thrown into stormy seas. Weeks later, the letter arrived. The scholarship covered half my tuition for the rest of my degree. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I dropped one job, allowed myself more than 4 hours of sleep a night, and even bought a small secondhand lamp so I didn't have to study under the harsh dorm fluorescence. But Professor Wilson's impact wasn't just financial. He became the mentor my parents never were. He taught me that money could be a tool, not a weapon. That credit wasn't always a trap, that home ownership wasn't foolish, that financial security came from informed choices, not rigid dogma. "Your father's rules sound less like wisdom and more like control," he said gently one afternoon. "Don't mistake control for care." The words pierced me. I had spent so long trying to decode my parents' lessons to prove myself within their system. But what if the system itself was broken? That realization brought both freedom and grief. The tension grew sharper each holiday break when I went home. My parents' questions always circled back to money. How much are you saving? Are you using credit cards? Show us your bank statements. When I mentioned opening a Roth IRA, my father sneered. That's gambling in the stock market. When I repeated Professor Wilson's advice about building credit responsibly, my mother frowned. You're being brainwashed by bankers. By junior year, the conflict reached its breaking point. During spring break, they surprised me with a visit. I thought they'd come to see me. Instead, they slid a form across the table at the campus coffee shop. "We want to be added as authorized users on your bank accounts," my father said, "just to monitor your spending, to keep you safe from mistakes." I stared at him in disbelief. "I'm 20. I'm paying for everything myself. Why would you need access to my accounts?" "Because you're making naive choices," he replied smoothly. "You need guidance." My mother's eyes welled up with tears. "Your independence is tearing this family apart." It was emotional blackmail at its finest. And for the first time, I didn't fold. "No," I said firmly, sliding the paper back across the table. "My accounts are mine." They left without another word, their silence stretching into 3 long months. That summer, instead of returning home, I subleased a tiny apartment with Katie. It was drafty, the plumbing questionable, but it was ours. I spent those months working full-time at an accounting internship Professor Wilson had helped me secure. For the first time, I glimpsed a future that wasn't dictated by their rules. It was terrifying and exhilarating. Each paycheck deposited into my account felt like a declaration of independence. Each bill I paid myself was a badge of honor. And in the quiet moments as Katie and I cooked noodles in our little kitchenette, I started to imagine something I had once thought impossible, a home of my own. The dream was still years away, but the seed had been planted. And little did I know that seed, the vision of a life built on my own terms, would be the very thing that pushed my parents to wage war against me. The silence from my parents after I refused to hand over my bank accounts was suffocating, but also strangely liberating. For 3 months, I didn't hear a word from them. Not a call, not a text, not even a guilt-ridden email. At first, I kept checking my phone compulsively, half expecting an explosion. When nothing came, I realized the quiet was its own form of punishment. They weren't speaking to me because I had dared to stand on my own. But for the first time, I was breathing air that belonged to me. The apartment Katie and I rented that summer wasn't much. peeling paint faucets that groaned every time you turned them, and a persistent smell of old carpet in the hallway. But to us, it was a palace. We furnished it with thrift store finds, laughed when our air mattress deflated in the middle of the night, and treated grocery shopping like a high-stakes game of strategy. How far could we stretch $20? I worked full-time at the accounting internship Professor Wilson had helped me secure. The first day I walked into the office wearing my single good blazer and clutching a second-hand briefcase, I felt a thrill that had nothing to do with paychecks. Here was a place where my effort and skill actually mattered, where numbers weren't used to control me, but to solve problems, balance sheets, and guide decisions. My supervisor, Mr. Lopez, was patient and straightforward. He explained things without condescension, praised my diligence, and trusted me with responsibilities beyond the usual intern busy work. Each time I signed my name at the bottom of a prepared report, I felt a tiny spark of validation that I had never received at home. At night, I lay awake in our creaky apartment, staring at the ceiling fan and calculating. Rent, utilities, food, transportation savings. I tracked everything, not in a secret ledger hidden by someone else, but in a notebook that was mine alone. And for the first time, my math added up to freedom. Of course, the silence from my parents didn't last. By fall, my mother broke first. A shaky voicemail, her voice heavy with tears. "Angela, your father and I are worried. You've changed so much. Please don't let money come between us. Call me." I listened to the message 3 times, searching for the words that weren't there. Acknowledgement, apology, understanding. All I heard was manipulation. When I finally called back, my father answered instead. His tone was clipped businesslike. "We want to see your financial plan," he said. "We're concerned you're making reckless decisions." Reckless. I was 20 years old, working 3 jobs, studying full-time, and surviving on bulk noodles. Reckless was not the word. But he didn't care about accuracy. He cared about control. I refused again, and the Cold War resumed. Katie became my anchor during those months. We made a pact no matter how complicated family ties got, we'd always remind each other of the truth. "Your parents' issues aren't your fault," she'd say, sliding me half a grilled cheese sandwich when I was too tired to cook. "They chose to treat money as a leash. That's on them, not you." It was a kind of friendship I'd never known before, one where nothing was transactional, where nothing was owed, just mutual care. By my final year of college, I had stopped expecting reconciliation. My parents were polite during short phone calls on holidays, but we avoided any mention of finances. The distance between us had hardened into something permanent, though none of us admitted it out loud. Graduation arrived like a miracle. I crossed the stage in a borrowed gown, my name called my degree in accounting, firmly in hand. In the audience, Katie cheered so loudly people turned to stare. Professor Wilson shook my hand. Afterward, his smile proud. My parents didn't attend. That night, Katie and I sat on the apartment floor with a bottle of cheap champagne. "To freedom," she said, raising her plastic cup. "To never letting anyone take our paychecks again," I added, clinking mine against hers. The bubbles burned my throat, but in the best way. Within weeks, I had secured a position at Harrington & Associates, a respected accounting firm. The salary seemed astronomical compared to diner tips and call center wages. Even after paying rent, buying professional clothes, and tackling student loan payments, I had something I'd never had before: leftover money. The temptation to spend it was strong. Colleagues invited me to happy hours, to weekend getaways, to concerts. But every time I thought about swiping my card, I remembered the years of deprivation and control. I wasn't about to let my hard-won independence slip through my fingers. Instead, I made a plan. I sat at my thrift store desk one evening, calculator in hand, running projections. If I lived frugally, really frugally, I could save enough for a down payment on a modest home in about 10 years. A home, my own. The idea felt dangerous, almost rebellious. After all, my father had spent years drilling into me that homeownership was a trap. Only fools buy houses, he'd said, his voice like a hammer driving the idea into my skull. But I couldn't ignore the yearning that welled up inside me whenever I thought of it. A place where no landlord could raise the rent. A place with walls I could paint, floors I could scuff, and a mailbox that truly belonged to me. I taped the word house to my mirror with a sticky note, a private reminder every morning as I dressed for work. This wasn't just a financial goal, it was proof. Proof that their system had been wrong, that my sacrifices had meant something, that I could build a life outside their ledgers. Meanwhile, my parents began circling again. Calls came more often, casual at first, then edged with questions. "How's work? Are you saving?" Have you thought about investments? I answered, vaguely careful not to reveal details. I had learned the hard way that information in their hands was ammunition. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. Their silence after my refusals had taught me something they didn't give up. They recalculated, waited, found new angles. And though I didn't know it yet one day, that persistence would drive them to my doorstep demanding repayment for the simple fact of being their child. But back then, as I stared at the sticky note on my mirror, I let myself believe in something else. In a decade, I would hold keys in my hand. Keys to a home that was entirely mine, earned dollar by dollar, choice by choice. And no one, least of all my parents, would be able to take it away. Or so I thought. The first paycheck from my new job at Harrington and Associates felt like a thunderclap in my hands. After years of scraping by, juggling 3 jobs, and calculating whether I could afford a bag of apples, the number printed on that check looked almost unreal. I deposited it, sat at my tiny desk, and stared at my budgeting notebook. This was more money than I had ever seen in one place. But instead of imagining dinners out or a new car, my mind went straight to the sticky note taped on my mirror house. I made myself a promise that night. No matter how long it took, no matter how many birthdays I skipped or happy hours I declined, I would buy a home. It wouldn't be a trap, as my father insisted. It would be my liberation. So I began living like a monk in a city full of spenders. My apartment was a 1-bedroom with peeling linoleum floors and drafty windows furnished almost entirely with thrift store finds. My closet contained a capsule wardrobe, 3 suits, 5 blouses, 2 pairs of shoes, all interchangeable. Lunch was a rotation of meal-prepped rice and beans, pasta, with frozen vegetables or canned tuna mixed with mayonnaise. Every receipt, every bill, every coffee run was logged into my budgeting app with near-obsessive precision. When colleagues invited me out after work, I smiled and claimed I had deadlines. When friends planned weekend trips, I invented excuses. Next time I'd say hiding the sting in my chest. Each dollar not spent felt like a brick in the foundation of the home I was building, one invisible payment at a time. Katie worried about me. By then, she was a nurse at the university hospital, her life just as exhausting, but lived with a little more balance. We met once a month at the same coffee shop, our one indulgence. "You need some balance," she told me, sipping her latte while I clutched my black drip coffee like it was liquid gold. "You can't starve yourself of joy forever. Saving is important, but so is living." "I'll live once I have a house," I said with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. She frowned. "What's the point of a house if you're miserable getting there?" Her words stayed with me, but so did the memory of my father's ledgers. If I loosened my grip, wouldn't I risk ending up like them, always grasping, always manipulating no? The only way to prove them wrong was to stick to my plan. 3 years into my career, I met Michael. It wasn't love at first sight, at least not in the traditional sense. We were both at a professional development workshop, the kind where speakers drone on about maximizing efficiency. During a break, we found ourselves at the same coffee station. "I hate these things," he muttered, pouring sugar into his cup. I laughed. "And yet we're both here. So what does that say about us?" We ended up at the same lunch table swapping stories. Michael was a software engineer with the same pragmatic streak I had. But unlike me, he wasn't afraid to admit he wanted to enjoy life along the way. He loved hiking, cooking elaborate meals, and occasionally splurging on travel. But when he learned about my financial goals, he didn't laugh or judge. "You're saving for a house. That's impressive," he said, eyes shining with something like respect. "I've been planning it for years," I admitted. "It's everything, really." He nodded. "Then I support it. But maybe I can show you how to enjoy the journey without derailing the destination." Our first date was a picnic in the park. No expensive restaurant, no flashy gestures, just sandwiches, fruit, and a spreadsheet open on his laptop. We compared retirement calculators, laughing over compound interest projections as if they were love poems. It sounds ridiculous now, but in that moment, something clicked. For the first time, I met someone who understood my obsession and didn't see it as madness. Over time, Michael became more than just a boyfriend. He became a mirror, reflecting back the parts of me I was too rigid to see. When I refused to join a group hike because of the cost of gas, he picked me up and drove anyway. When I skipped celebrating my promotion to senior accountant, he surprised me with a home-cooked dinner and a candle-lit spreadsheet congratulating me on my increased savings rate. "You need joy, Angela," he told me gently one night. "Otherwise, you'll reach the finish line and realize you've been running on empty." His words hit harder than Katie's because I knew he wasn't trying to pull me away from my goal, he was trying to make sure I reached it alive. Meanwhile, my career moved steadily upward. Each promotion went straight into my savings account. While others upgraded apartments, I stayed in my modest rental. While colleagues leased shiny cars, I nursed my old sedan along. My savings grew brick by brick, closer and closer to that dream. But my parents were never far from the edges of my life. For years, they hovered in silence, reduced to strained phone calls on birthdays or terse holiday text, and then slowly they started calling more often. At first, it was casual. How's work? Are you eating well? Then the questions sharpened. What's your salary now? How much have you saved? I learned to answer vaguely. I had no doubt they were calculating weighing my worth not as a daughter, but as an asset. And then one winter evening, the mask slipped. I visited them in their new rental, a surprisingly upscale townhouse. Over dinner, my father cleared his throat. We're having some temporary cash flow problems, he said, pushing his plate aside. Just until some investments mature. 20,000 would cover it. I froze fork halfway to my mouth. 20,000. He said it like he was asking for a ride to the airport. I need to think about it, I said carefully. His jaw tightened, but he didn't press. My mother dabbed her eyes with a napkin. We might lose the house, she whispered. It wasn't true. I knew it even then. But I left without agreeing, my stomach in knots. Back home, I told Michael and Katie. This is history repeating itself, I confessed. If I give them money now, it'll never stop. They both agreed, so I said no. The result was exactly what I expected: cold fury from my father, tearful voicemails from my mother, threats of financial ruin. Yet somehow mysteriously their crisis resolved itself without my help. 6 months later, another request came. Then another. 15,000 for medical bills. 30,000 for a business opportunity. Each time I refused. Each time their rage and disappointment grew sharper. But I held firm. Because by then I was closer than ever. My savings account had swollen to a number that made my chest tighten with disbelief. For the first time in my life, the dream wasn't theoretical. It was real, tangible, waiting just beyond my fingertips. 12 years of sacrifice, of deprivation, of saying no to nearly everything, it was finally about to pay off. I didn't tell my parents. I knew if they found out, they'd do everything in their power to sabotage it. But secrets I would learn don't stay hidden forever. The older I got, the more I realized my parents didn't see me as a person, they saw me as a resource, a well they could draw from now that their own buckets had run dry. The first time they asked me for $20,000, I almost convinced myself it was a one-time emergency. But then came the second request, then the third. 15,000 for mysterious medical bills. 30,000 for a business opportunity my father refused to detail. Each time I said no, their anger sharpened like a knife. After everything we sacrificed for you, my father hissed over the phone one evening. You can't even help your own parents. Sacrificed. That word again. To him, parenting had always been an investment, never an act of love. My mother was subtler. Her voice trembled as she left long, tearful voicemails. Angela, we might lose our home. We don't know what else to do. Please, sweetheart, just this once. But I had already seen through their performance. A week after their so-called financial ruin, a mutual acquaintance posted photos online of my parents at a resort in Florida, sipping cocktails by the pool, smiling under the sun. My stomach twisted as I stared at the screen. Florida, luxury cocktails. While I had been eating meal-prepped pasta and turning down vacations with Michael so I could save every penny. The betrayal was sharp, but the clarity was sharper. They weren't desperate, they were entitled. I showed the photos to Michael. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. They're testing how far you'll bend. If you give them money now, it will never stop. Katie, ever blunt, added, they've mistaken your independence for profit. They don't see you as a daughter anymore. They see you as an ATM. The truth stung, but it also freed me. I doubled down on my boundaries. Calls went unanswered. Requests went ignored. When I did respond, my words were clipped professional, the way you'd address a client rather than a parent. And that's when their tactics changed. One Sunday, while I was meal prepping, my phone buzzed. It was my father. Against my better judgment, I answered. Angela, he said, without greeting, his voice like gravel, you've done well for yourself. That's clear. But you need to remember who gave you the foundation to succeed. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Your mother and I raised you, housed you, fed you, clothed you. We poured nearly $500,000 into your upbringing. That wasn't charity, it was an investment. And it's time you started showing returns." The words chilled me. My heart pounded in my ears. Are you saying I owe you for raising me?" "Don't twist this," he snapped. "We're not asking for the world, just recognition, just repayment for what we put into you. Any decent child would understand that." I ended the call before my voice could break. My hands shook as I stood over the counter knife, poised over a half-chopped onion. Tears blurred my vision, but not from the sting of the onion. From the confirmation of what I had feared since I was 16, that to them love came with a price tag. That night, Michael held me as I tried to process it. "Parents don't get to bill their children," he said firmly. "That's not how family works." But my father seemed determined to prove otherwise. Over the next months, their requests became demands. They sent me spreadsheets of expenses from my childhood food, clothing, medical bills, extracurricular activities, all totaled up with compound interest, as if I were a failed investment portfolio. My father even assigned a monetary value to emotional labor and life guidance. I laughed bitterly the first time I read the document. "Life guidance," I muttered, shoving the paper at Michael. "You mean teaching me to fear money? Teaching me that every dollar I earned belonged to them?" Michael's expression darkened. "This isn't just manipulation, it's abuse." Katie. When I showed her was even harsher. They're building a case. They're not just asking anymore, they're preparing for something bigger. Her words sent a shiver down my spine, but I couldn't imagine what she meant. A lawsuit. That seemed absurd. Parents suing their child. No, even my father wouldn't go that far. Or so I thought. Meanwhile, my own life was moving forward. At work, I earned another promotion. My savings grew steadily, a fortress of numbers in my account. And on weekends, Michael and I drove through neighborhoods, window shopping for houses. We didn't put in offers yet, but each open house, each tour of a modest 2-bedroom with peeling wallpaper, or a small yard, brought me closer to the future I had been clawing toward for over a decade. But even in those moments of joy, my parents' shadow loomed. During one visit, they showed up at my apartment unannounced. My father stood in the doorway, scanning the space like an appraiser. My mother wrinkled her nose at my thrifted furniture. "You've clearly done well," my father said, eyes glinting. "It's time you share the wealth." I clenched my fists at my sides. "My money is mine. I worked for it. You don't get to demand it." His smile was thin, dangerous. "We'll see about that." That night, long after they left, I sat at my desk and stared at my savings account. The numbers should have comforted me. Instead, they felt like a target painted on my back. I began to wonder if Katie was right. Maybe they were preparing for something bigger. Maybe this wasn't just about guilt anymore. Maybe it was about entitlement with legal teeth. But in those moments, I pushed the thought away. I couldn't imagine them dragging me to court. That was unthinkable. And yet the unthinkable was exactly what was coming. For now, though, I poured myself back into my work and my savings plan. I told myself that if I just stayed disciplined, if I just kept my head down, I would reach my goal, a house that was mine, a sanctuary no one could touch. But what I didn't realize was that by chasing that dream so fiercely, I was also building the very thing that would provoke their final, most vicious attack. 12 years of sacrifice came down to a single moment, the slip of paper in my hands that read, "Pre-approved." I remember sitting in my car outside the mortgage broker's office, gripping the folder like it was made of gold. After more than a decade of saving budgeting, saying no to nearly everything, I was finally ready. It was surreal. My father had spent my entire life drilling into me that home ownership was a trap, a burden, a fool's errand. Yet here I was, 32 years old, about to sign for my very first house. Michael was the first person I called. "Congratulations, house hunter," he said warmly. "This calls for a celebration, a reasonably priced one, of course." That weekend, we toasted with a cheap bottle of champagne on the balcony of my apartment. Katie joined us, grinning like a proud sister. 12 years of ramen noodles and spreadsheets finally paid off, she said, clinking her glass against mine. The next morning, the search began. House hunting was brutal. The market was competitive, and for weeks, every house I saw either had hidden problems or was snapped up before I could blink. I lost 3 bidding wars in a row. Each rejection stung, but I held firm. I hadn't sacrificed half my life to settle for a house that didn't feel right. Then came the Riverside property. It wasn't flashy, but it was perfect for me. A modest 2-bedroom with a small backyard, just enough space for a home office and maybe a little garden. The neighborhood was quiet with tree-lined streets and families who waved from their porches. The moment I stepped inside, I could picture myself there cooking dinner in the cozy kitchen, reading in the living room, watching sunsets from the back patio. I made an offer that night. When the sellers accepted, I nearly collapsed from relief. The closing process blurred together inspections, signatures, endless forms. But then came the moment I had dreamed of for over a decade, the keys dropping into my palm. Cold metal, my keys, my house. Michael was with me for the final walkthrough. He stood in the empty living room, hands in his pockets, smiling. 12 years of sacrifice, and it's finally yours. I nodded, unable to speak. Tears pricked my eyes. This wasn't just a house. It was vindication. Proof that my father's rules weren't the only way to survive. Proof that I could build something stable on my own. We sat on the bare floor that evening, eating takeout pizza straight from the box. The walls echoed with our laughter. The air filled with the smell of tomato sauce and cardboard. For the first time in my life, I felt safe. For 2 weeks, I floated on a cloud of quiet joy. I unpacked slowly, arranging furniture one piece at a time, savoring the process. Each room transformed from empty to mine. I planted flowers in the backyard, imagining summer evenings with Katie and Michael around a grill. And then the phone call came. I had just returned from the hardware store, a box of light bulbs in one arm, when my phone buzzed. My mother's name lit up the screen. Angela, she began, her voice taut. We just had the most interesting conversation with Barbara Thompson. My stomach tightened. Barbara was the mother of a high school classmate she lived only a few streets over. She mentioned running into you at the hardware store. She congratulated us on your new house in Riverside. My mother's tone sharpened. Imagine our surprise to hear such news from a neighbor instead of from you. I swallowed hard. I was planning to tell you once I was settled. I lied. The truth was, I hadn't wanted them to know at all. We'll be there in 30 minutes, my father's voice boomed, suddenly cutting into the line. Text us the address. Before I could protest, the call ended. The next half hour was a blur. I shoved packing paper into closets, straightened throw pillows, wiped down counters. Michael offered to stay, but I shook my head. It'll only make things worse. Keep your phone on. Right on schedule, their silver SUV pulled into my driveway. My father climbed out, his expression severe. My mother followed, her lips pressed into a thin line. They walked through the house like inspectors, their eyes scanning every detail. My father demanded to know the purchase price, the mortgage rate, the taxes. My mother ran her finger along a shelf and frowned at the dust. I can't believe you did this without consulting us, my father snapped. After everything we taught you about the trap of homeownership, you throw it all away on this liability. Impulsive. I shot back, my voice trembling. I saved for 12 years. I researched the market for 3. I put 20% down and locked in a fixed rate within my budget. There's nothing impulsive about this. You've been planning this behind our backs for years, my mother said, as though I had confessed to a crime. I didn't tell you because I knew this would be your reaction, I said, gesturing to their scowls. I'm 32 years old. I don't need your permission. My father's face reddened. After everything we've done for you, every sacrifice, we deserve recognition. We deserve repayment. The words sliced through the room. Repayment. What exactly are you suggesting? I asked slowly. We raised you, my father said coldly. Fed you, clothed, you housed you. By our calculations, it cost at least $400,000. Now that you have assets, it's time you repay that debt. I stared at him, my heart pounding. You're asking me to pay you back for being my parents. Not asking, he said firmly, expecting. My mother's voice trembled, but her eyes glittered. We invested everything in you, Angela. Now that investment should provide returns. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. This wasn't about advice. It wasn't even about manipulation anymore. This was a claim, a demand. No, I whispered. Their expressions hardened. My father leaned closer, his voice a growl. If you won't acknowledge your obligations voluntarily, we have other options. Don't forget, we've kept detailed records of every penny we spent on you. The courts will recognize that. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. They left soon after, their SUV rolling slowly down the street, taillights glowing red like warning signals. I stood in the doorway of my brand new home, the keys cold in my palm, my dream tainted by their entitlement. 8 days later, a courier knocked on my door. He handed me an envelope, heavy and official. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a summons. My parents weren't bluffing. They were suing me. The envelope sat heavy in my lap, its corners digging into my palms as if to remind me that this wasn't a nightmare, it was real. My parents had actually filed a lawsuit against me, their only daughter. The complaint was thick with legal jargon, but even my untrained eyes could pick out the horrifying essence: Thomas and Sandra Johnson versus Angela Johnson. They claimed I owed them compensation for parental investment and unjust enrichment. The words blurred, but one number seared itself into my brain: $400,000. 400,000. They demanded either the forced sale of my home with half the proceeds given to them, or a home equity loan in that same amount. It wasn't a request anymore. It was a court order waiting to happen. I remember sitting on my porch steps, the papers trembling in my hands, the autumn air cutting through my thin sweater. Neighbors walked their dogs. Kids played on bikes. Life moved on, as though my world hadn't just imploded. When Michael arrived 20 minutes later, I was still frozen there, unable to move. He knelt down in front of me, gently pulling the papers from my grip. His brow furrowed as he skimmed them. "They actually did it," he whispered, disbelief etched in his face. I could barely form the words. "My parents are suing me." Katie came over that evening, dropping her nursing bag by the door and wrapping me in the kind of hug only she could give. She read through the documents, shaking her head. "This is insane. Parents don't get to bill their kids for existing. That's not how family works." But insane or not, the lawsuit was real, and if I didn't respond properly, I could lose everything. Michael was already searching online. "You need a lawyer, a good one. This isn't just about money, it's about protecting yourself." The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in my career. My voice cracked as I explained to my boss, Alan, that I had a personal emergency. He didn't ask questions, but his tone carried quiet concern. "Take the time you need, Angela. Family disputes over money can be uglier than divorces." The words hit too close to home. I spent the next week drowning in consultations with lawyers. Some dismissed the case as ridiculous, others seemed all too eager to escalate it into a drawn-out war that would line their pockets. None of them felt right. Then I met Jennifer Chang. She was calm, measured. Her dark hair pulled back neatly, her tone steady and deliberate. She didn't dismiss my fears, but she didn't exaggerate them either. "I've seen cases like this before," she said, sliding the papers back across the desk. "They're rarely successful, but they can be emotionally draining and expensive to defend. The law is clear. Parents are obligated to support their children until adulthood without expectation of repayment. But that won't stop them from trying to convince a judge otherwise." Her confidence steadied me, though my stomach still twisted. "So, what happens now?" "We'll build your defense," she explained. "You'll need to document your financial independence, show that you purchased the house entirely with your own earned income. Ideally, we'll also demonstrate that your parents not only failed to support you as an adult, but in fact siphoned off your own earnings when you were a teenager." I swallowed hard. "That's all true. I just never thought I'd have to prove it in court." Jennifer leaned forward. "Angela, this isn't just about money. It's about control. From what you've told me, your parents used money as a leash your entire life. This lawsuit is simply the final tug. If you want to break free, we fight back." Her words lodged deep in my chest. The next few weeks became a blur of gathering evidence. I requested old pay stubs from my teenage grocery job, dug through dusty boxes of financial aid records, printed bank statements showing my relentless saving patterns. I even found old emails between myself and Professor Wilson about the scholarship he had helped me secure. Each document was a lifeline proof that I had survived without my parents' financial support. Jennifer also encouraged me to reach out to potential witnesses. Katie agreed without hesitation. "I'll tell the court exactly what you went through," she said, fire in her voice. "Michael, too." And when I called Professor Wilson, his gentle tone steadied me. "Of course I'll testify, Angela. You earned everything you have. Don't let them rewrite that story." Meanwhile, the psychological toll grew heavier. I couldn't sleep without jolting awake my mind, replaying my father's voice. "We invested in you. You owe us returns." My appetite vanished. The house that had once felt like sanctuary now felt haunted, every creak and shadow whispering that they were coming to take it away. Jennifer recommended I see a therapist. That's how I met Dr. Patel, who specialized in family trauma. Sitting in her softly lit office, I poured out years of ledger books, stolen paychecks, and manipulative lectures. "What you're describing is financial abuse," she said gently. "Your parents used money not as a means of care, but as a method of control. This lawsuit is a continuation of that abuse." Hearing it named out loud was both devastating and liberating. For years I had wondered if I was overreacting, if I was ungrateful, if I was the problem. But Dr. Patel's words reframed everything. Love wasn't supposed to come with invoices. Parenthood wasn't a loan to be repaid. Even so, the doubt crept in during the quiet hours. Lying awake in the dark, I whispered questions to the ceiling. What if they're right? What if I do owe them something? But Dr. Patel reminded me again and again. Children don't ask to be born. Parents choose to have them. Support is their responsibility, not a debt to be collected. Despite her reassurance, the anxiety gnawed at me as the court date loomed closer. I pictured my parents standing across the courtroom, dressed in calculated modesty, spinning tales of sacrifice and hardship. I knew my father would have spreadsheets prepared, numbers twisted to his advantage. My mother would cry on cue, and I would have to stand there not as their daughter, but as their opponent. The thought made me sick. But when I looked at the evidence piling up in neat folders, when I saw Michael quietly making me dinner after long days, when Katie showed up with coffee at midnight to help me sort through files, I remembered what Jennifer had said. This wasn't just about money. It was about freedom. If I won, I would keep my home. If I lost, I would lose not just the house, but the last shred of dignity I had fought so hard to reclaim. Either way, one truth had already crystallized. The parents I had once longed to please no longer existed. In their place stood two people who saw me not as a daughter, but as an asset. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to fight back. The county courthouse loomed over me like a fortress carved from stone, its granite columns cold and unyielding. On the morning of the trial, I arrived 90 minutes early, Jennifer's advice. She wanted me calm, composed, unhurried. But no amount of punctuality could ease the weight pressing against my chest. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. Michael and Katie sat behind me in the gallery, their presence a silent lifeline. Jennifer leaned close as we waited for the judge. Remember, she whispered facts, not feelings. They'll try to bait you with emotion. Stay steady. When the bailiff called the court to order, I looked across the room. My parents sat at the opposite table, my father in his somber gray suit, jaw, clenched eyes sharp. My mother in a modest floral dress, her expression carefully arranged into maternal worry. They didn't look at me, not once. Judge Harriet Morales presided, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and piercing eyes. She scanned the documents in front of her, lips pursed. This case is unusual, she said finally. Family disputes over money rarely come before this bench. I hope both sides understand the seriousness of turning personal grievances into legal battles. Their attorney, Mr. Donovan, rose first. His voice was polished, rehearsed. Your Honor, my clients are not unreasonable people. They are parents who sacrificed everything to raise their daughter, housing, food, medical care, education. They did so at great personal cost, forgoing home ownership and comforts so she could succeed. Now, as she prospers, they simply seek fair compensation for their investment. Investment. The words sliced through me like glass. Donovan gestured toward my parents. The plaintiffs are not asking for charity, but for recognition of the substantial resources they poured into their child. It is only just that now that she has acquired significant assets, she provides some return. When he sat down, Jennifer rose. Her tone was calm but firm, every syllable clipped with precision. Your Honor, the law is clear. Parents have a legal obligation to support their children until adulthood. There is no expectation, legal, moral, or otherwise, that such support requires repayment. Miss Johnson purchased her home entirely with her own earned income. She has been financially independent since she was 18. In fact, the evidence will show her parents not only failed to support her, but actually diverted her teenage earnings for their own use. Judge Morales' brow lifted slightly at that. She nodded for the testimony to begin. My father took the stand first. He launched into a speech about his sacrifices, spreadsheets in hand. He detailed food costs, clothing costs, extracurricular fees, all multiplied by 18 years and compounded with interest. He spoke with the authority of a man who believed numbers could not be questioned. Jennifer's cross-examination stripped that authority bare. You required Angela to contribute 70% of her teenage earnings to a so-called family fund, correct? Yes, he admitted. It was to teach her responsibility. And when she asked to use her college fund for application fees, you told her the money was unavailable. He shifted in his seat. It was invested. Invested where Jennifer pressed. In various accounts. Do you have documentation of those accounts? His silence stretched the courtroom tense. Finally, he muttered, those records would be hard to locate. Jennifer leaned forward. so you cannot prove those funds existed separately from your own. No, he snapped, losing patience. We provided for her. That money was compensation for our sacrifices. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Even Judge Morales's pen froze mid-note. My mother's testimony fared no better. She spoke tearfully about giving up vacations and luxuries for my benefit. But when Jennifer asked about her designer handbags and their Florida resort trip, her answers stumbled. Those were occasional indulgences, she said weakly. Then it was my turn. My hands trembled as I took the oath, but Jennifer's steady nod grounded me. I told my story, the ledgers, the confiscated birthday money, the siphoned wages, the sleepless nights of juggling 3 jobs. I described saving for 12 years, scraping together every penny, resisting temptations, while my peers moved freely through life. I pulled out bank statements showing regular deposits from my jobs year after year, scholarship letters, mortgage documents with no co-signers, a trail of independence that was undeniable. But the most powerful moments came from the witnesses. Professor Wilson testified about my academic dedication, my exhaustion from multiple jobs, and the scholarship he had secured for me. She never once mentioned parental financial support, he said firmly. In fact, she often said she was entirely on her own. My former grocery store manager, Mr. Peterson, nearly brought the courtroom to silence. Her father came to me once insisting that Angela's paychecks be direct deposited into an account he controlled. I refused company policy, wouldn't allow it. But it stuck with me. I thought it was odd a parent trying to take a teenager's wages. Finally, Katie spoke. She described our dorm nights, the ramen dinners, the whispered confessions about my parents' control. Angela built everything she has on her own, Katie said, her voice trembling with anger. Her parents didn't just fail to support her, they sabotaged her. By the time testimony ended, the narrative my parents had tried to weave was unraveling. Their sacrifices looked less like selflessness and more like manipulation. Their investments looked less like care and more like theft. After a brief recess, Judge Morales returned with her ruling. Her voice was calm, but edged with steel. The court finds no legal basis for the plaintiff's claim. Parents have a duty to support their children until adulthood. That duty does not create a debt. Furthermore, the evidence suggests that far from supporting their daughter, the plaintiffs diverted her earnings for their own purposes. While that matter is beyond the scope of today's ruling, the defendant would likely have grounds for her own claim should she choose to pursue it. She paused, eyes narrowing at my parents. This case is dismissed with prejudice. The plaintiffs will also bear the defendant's legal costs, as the claim was frivolous and vexatious. The gavel came down like thunder. I sat frozen relief and grief, warring inside me. Legally, I had won. But as my parents stood and left the courtroom without looking back, I understood the cost. The final thread between us had been cut. Michael squeezed my hand from behind his eyes steady. Katie whispered, "It's over, Angela. You're free." Free. The word felt fragile, almost foreign. I had kept my house, but I had lost my parents. And yet, maybe, just maybe, that was the price of breaking their chains for good. The day after the trial, I woke up in my house to a silence that felt different. For months, silence had meant dread waiting for the next voicemail, the next demand, the next envelope. But that morning, the quiet carried no threat. It was peace. Still, the victory felt hollow. My home was legally safe, yet every corner echoed with memories of my parents' betrayal. The walls I had painted with such hope now felt stained by their intrusion. I wandered through the rooms in a daze, running my hand over the counters, the doorknobs, the windowsills. This was supposed to be my sanctuary. Instead, it had become a battlefield. For the first week, I threw myself into physical labor. I sanded cabinet doors until my fingers ached, painted over scuffs that no one else would notice, rearranged furniture until midnight. Exhaustion was easier than grief. "You don't have to fix everything at once," Michael said gently one evening as he found me scrubbing the grout in the bathroom with unnecessary ferocity. "The house isn't going anywhere, and neither am I." His words stopped me cold. I sank to the floor, tears streaming down my face. For so long, love had felt conditional, transactional, something tallied in ledgers. But here was someone who asked for nothing except to stay. Katie, too, refused to let me drown in solitude. A month after the trial, she organized a small housewarming gathering. Only people who knew the truth were invited friends, colleagues, my mentor, Professor Wilson. They brought plants, books, and laughter that filled the rooms for the first time since the lawsuit. Professor Wilson handed me a leafy green fern. "Your parents taught you who not to become," he said quietly. "That's a lesson, though, not the one they intended." His words lodged deep in my chest. Maybe this house didn't have to be defined by the shadows of my past. Maybe I could fill it with something new. I began slowly reclaiming each space. The living room became a hub for game nights with friends echoing with laughter instead of accusations. The kitchen, once a symbol of deprivation, transformed into a place of abundance as I learned to cook meals that nourished rather than merely sustained. In the backyard, I planted a vegetable garden. Each sprout that broke through the soil felt like a declaration life can grow here. The spare bedroom, once set up as a home office, I converted into something more personal. One corner became a reading nook with a comfortable chair and shelves of books, financial guides. Yes, but also novels and memoirs about survival and resilience. On the walls, I hung photographs me with Katie in our dorm room. Michael holding up a picnic basket, Professor Wilson smiling proudly at my graduation. These were the faces of my real family, the ones who had lifted me up instead of tearing me down. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from my mother. My hands shook as I opened it. "Angela," it read, "we should put the unpleasantness behind us. Families fight, but at the end of the day, we're still blood. Let's meet and move on." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of harm, just a request to sweep the ashes under the rug. After a long talk with Dr. Patel, I wrote back with clear boundaries. If they wanted a relationship, it had to start with accountability. They needed to recognize how their actions were abusive and agree to respect my independence. Their silence in response told me everything I needed to know. The price of reconciliation was my freedom, and I wasn't willing to pay it. It hurt. God, it hurt. But for the first time, the pain came with clarity. I couldn't change them. I could only change what I allowed into my life. As the 1-year anniversary of buying my home approached, Michael surprised me with a gift, a custom doormat that read in bold letters, "Earned, not given." I cried when I saw it, because that was the truth of my journey. Every brick, every dollar, every hour of lost sleep had been mine, and no one could take that from me. With Professor Wilson's encouragement, I began volunteering at a local community center, teaching financial literacy workshops for young adults aging out of foster care. Many of them had no family support, just like me. "You explain this stuff differently," one teenager told me after a session on building credit. "Like you actually get how scary it is." I smiled, because I do. The classes grew, eventually becoming a regular series, sponsored by local credit unions. I built a curriculum that addressed not just practical skills, budgeting, saving credit, but also the emotional side of money boundaries, independence, the courage to say no. Every time I spoke, I felt like I was giving others the tools I had been denied. Meanwhile, Michael and I grew closer. We talked about marriage, about combining households, but always with respect for boundaries. We promised each other we'd never replicate the patterns I had escaped. No ledgers of control, no debts disguised as love, only partnership. Katie remained my anchor, our friendship forged in the fires of shared struggle. You know, she teased one evening as we watered the garden, "This house isn't just a house anymore, it's a monument. Proof that you survived." She was right. My house wasn't just wood and plaster, it was resilience made tangible. Today, when I walk through my front door, I no longer hear my father's voice railing against mortgages. I hear laughter from game nights. I smell herbs from the garden. I see a home filled with people who love me without conditions. I've stopped waiting for an apology that will never come. Instead, I built a life that doesn't need one. Family, I've learned, isn't about bloodlines or debts tallied in ledgers. It's about care, respect, and the freedom to be yourself. Sometimes the healthiest family is the one you choose, not the one you're born into. So if you're watching this and struggling with parents or relatives who use money to control you, please hear me. You don't owe them your freedom. Love doesn't come with invoices. Your worth isn't measured by what others can take from you, but by what you choose to build for yourself. And every time I step onto my doormat, earned, not given, I remember that truth.